And welcome, everybody. It's Rob Mullins here with another episode of the Planetmullins Podcast. And today I have a world-class drummer and producer, longtime good friend who I can't wait to talk to because he's so busy traveling the world and working with people like Herb Alpert and Josh Groban, the Jazz Crusaders, Bobby Caldwell, Diane Shure, Michelle Legrand, YANNI. Whoa, I got to hear a YANNI story today. I want to hear at least one. Yeah, and he's in his place there in LA today. And please, everybody, join me in welcoming to the Planetmullins Podcast, Mr. Joel Taylor.
Hi, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well out there in these tough times, these crazy tough times.
And speaking of tough times, one way that you can get through any skin problems you might have during a tough time is to get yourself some body rejuvenation candles. They're a candle that you melt and use the wax in a therapeutic way. You can go to their website and learn all about it, see how to do it. And because people are getting more skin problems because of their nerves during the pandemic. They're candles with a purpose to emit light and to moisturize and rejuvenate the skin as a lotion. So I use them. You'll love them. BodyRejuvenationCandles.com. So Joel, what the heck is going on, man? How are you?
I'm good, man. Great to see you. We live in the same city, but I rarely run into you.
Well, it's funny because there's a bass player. I'm trying to remember his name. The bass player with Bonnie Raitt. Hutch, right? Hutch Hudson, is that his name?
Well, I was thinking of another guy who his name's escaping me at the moment as well.
Right, yeah, but you know, it's funny. Like 2 years ago, I had this call from Steve McCormick, who's like a bluesy Venice cat. And Steve DeStanislaw was playing drums, Stan Barron's on harmonica. And I get there, and the bass player is this guy. And he looks at me, and I look at him, and we go, have we ever met before? Have we ever run into each other? He goes, no, but Rob, I know your name. I know all your albums. I've been wanting to meet you. And I said, well, you too, man, all these amazing world tours with Bonnie Raitt and stuff. And he goes, well, do you live in LA? And I said, yeah. And he goes, do you live in LA? Yeah, it took us 38 years.
Is that unbelievable?
Being in the same town and just to run into each other.
Yeah, lots of people here, and as everybody knows, LA is really spread out. So
right, it's a whole different thing from back east, like where you went to school in Boston and stuff, right?
Yeah, totally different, and totally different from Wyoming, where I grew up.
Well, you know, the thing that I thought was so interesting in doing my show prep for today was I knew that you were from some little place. It's called Worland, Wyoming. Is that right?
That's right.
And then I thought to myself, you know, Pat Metheny grew up in a really remote little town in Missouri, Lee's Falls or something like that.
Yeah, outside of Wichita, I think.
Yeah. Okay, so the question obviously is that there's all these stereotypes about Wyoming, and most of them aren't very good. I mean, they really aren't. And then you think, you know, because I have the picture in my head of, okay, here's Joel, and then like right around the corner is a big cow ranch, and then there's like a bunch of rodeos and stuff, and he's listening to frickin' Coltrane on a record player, and everybody at his school thinks he's weird. So, right. So how did that happen that you got so into jazz and all that?
Well, good question. It was due to my brother and my brother's friends. He was a drummer. He was about 5 years older than me. And he had really good musical taste. I mean, I grew up on rock and roll, and, you know, he was a rock and roll drummer, basically. And so, you know, we were listening to Hendrix and Cream and Zeppelin every day, you know, growing up. And then when he got in college, he started listening, like branching out to like Jeff Beck, Mahavishnu Orchestra, those kinds of fusion band, you know, at
Oh,
the
right. Well,
time.
it's like
And
jazz rock, yeah.
yeah, more jazz rock and Crusaders. And so, you know, naturally his record collection would become mine when he'd come home on breaks and
Oh,
and all that. And I guess he was probably into it like the last couple of years in high school. So I was in junior high when I started to get a taste of that. And, you know, growing up, I was more of a trumpet player than a drummer.
right. Yeah, that's right.
So I was, you know, my goal actually, my idol was Doc Severinsen. So my
Oh,
goal, you know, since I was 14 was to move out to LA and get in a studio scene here. But back then it was like getting a studio scene on trumpet. So
oh, wow.
that,
That's, well, probably even more competitive on trumpet than drums in some ways.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, you can't compete with Wayne Bergeron.
All right.
or Gary Grant or Jerry Hay or, you know, all the yo cats are out here
Right. Well,
in the horn world.
I got a confession to make. I particularly hate the trumpet.
Oh, it's a brutal instrument, man.
Well, it was brutal for me because I went to University of Northern Colorado in Greeley,
Yeah.
and somebody in the marching band got sick. And so they put me in the marching band. I was a percussion major, put me in the marching band and said, hold the trumpet up and pretend you're a trumpet player for the marching season because we got football games to play at.
Just pretend. Wow.
Well, I didn't know.
Yeah.
And so here I am with like the mouthpiece freezing to my lips in the winter at the stadium and stuff. And that guy was a trumpet player, that director.
Is
And
that right?
I've been pissed at him, and
I got my mouthpiece right here.
Get it off my show. Get it off my show right now. But anyway, so obviously you're doing a lot more drumming and producing now than playing trumpet. And, you know, through all these years that we've known each other, we haven't seen each other much. But what I did notice is that you never seem to be out of a gig. You're always, you know, I remember calling you for gigs and stuff. Well, I'm in Russia for a week. Oh, I'll call you when I get back. So then I call and you'd be like, no, man, I got to teach at 2 universities and then I got a session and then I'm going to the airport. And like, God, I mean, have you always had kind of that driven personality, or has it been just because, you know, it takes a lot to make the rent, or what?
It's more, it takes a lot to pay the rent. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm not the most driven cat. Okay. I mean, I certainly used to practice my ass off when I was younger. And, you know, I mean, I've just been lucky, I guess, just to, you know, have a lot of gigs out here. And I try to keep my mind open. I don't limit myself to one style. So well, I think that's my big forte, I think. You know, I'm a really good rock player and a good jazz player and Latin and Brazilian, and so I try and keep it all together, you know. And I really enjoy all those genres, and
amazing.
So that's why I get these calls from. I mean, I'll do Rick Springfield one week. You know, I've toured with him off and on the last couple of years, and then the next week, you're right. I go to Russia a lot, and I'm playing straight ahead jazz over there, like esoteric straight ahead jazz.
Right.
Some Prokofiev meets Coltrane shit.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is, when I started reading through the names on your credit list, I was thinking exactly that same thing because, you know, let's just go over a couple of them again. So, okay, we got Edgar Winter, so that's hard rock, Southern rock. Then you have the Jazz Crusaders. That's the Crusaders vibe. Then you have Diane Schurer, girl singer, straight ahead jazz. And
you hooked me up with that. We played the Playboy Jazz Festival with David Carpenter, and we also did Winter Park up at 10,000 feet. I'll never forget that.
Well, funny thing about that is that that was my last gig with Diane. And there was two. I was happy that I was able to get you and Carp on some gigs, but you're the one that introduced me to Carp after Bromberg left. But
true.
But you know, the two things that Diane Schurer had against me was, number one, we did that Playboy thing, and I was playing piano for her, and you know, she plays piano on her own gigs a lot. And then when the review came out in the LA Times, all they did is talk about the phenomenal Rob Mullins in the
Trio
of
oh
her
oh wow
and the Rob Mullins trio.
wow
So,
you know oh that was the nail
so
in
that
the
was
coffin.
the first thing.
Yeah.
Now, the second thing is that we're at Winter Park, like after that, playing that festival. And I was already on thin ice. I'd been warned, like the managers had called and said, look, buddy, you know,
Don't
so
upstage her.
yeah, right. So
Yeah.
we're on this huge stage. You remember Winter Park? That stage is like 200 feet across.
Yeah.
And Diane's all the way to stage right. I'm all the way to stage left, and I'm smoking a cigarette 200 feet away from her, and she could smell it.
Oh my God.
And I'm outdoors in the mountains in Colorado, where I went to high school, and everybody's smoking weed anyway. And that was the last straw right there. Is that
Wow.
after that gig, I got fired for having a cigarette 200 feet away.
I had no idea.
From someone outdoors. So, but going through these names, I mean, see, it's impressive because, and I was talking with another guest of mine, Preston Glass, the producer, the other day, because he's mostly been in the R&B thing, but you're very comfortable with the R&B stuff. You can play the wildest jazz and hip hop things, and you play, you know, behind these Sinatra pretender guys. Like, you know, Carp always used to have that saying. He said the 4 phases of the musician's career. Do you remember that saying that he had?
No, I don't remember that.
Carp taught me this one, man. I'll put Michael Bublé in there, see if I can remember it.
Okay. But, you know, Michael's a great cat, and he's a great singer.
Yeah, so he
is. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, no, he is. But this just shows you about the music business.
Yeah.
Hey, have you heard of Michael Bublé? That's phase 1. Phase 2, get me Michael Bublé. Phase 3, what happened to Michael Bublé? Phase 4, get me a young Michael Bublé.
Michael Bublé. There you go.
Yeah, folks, if you don't know what we're talking about when we say Carp, we're talking about the amazing bass player Dave Carpenter that did a whole bunch of gigs. You guys did Alan Holdsworth together, right?
We did, yeah.
What was that like with Alan Holdsworth? That guy's a monster guitar player.
Ridiculous. I'd always been a fan of his, you know, since I was in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And I finally, I was teaching at MI, actually, the Musicians Institute. Mm-hmm. I was doing some classes with Jeff Berlin, and Jeff Berlin was his bass player for many years. And
great bass player.
And they brought, MI brought Alan in for a clinic. And Jeff, they didn't have a drummer, so Jeff called me up and said, hey, man, you want to do a clinic with me and Alan? I said, of course.
Yeah, of course.
So I went down there and ended up, I said, what are we going to play? You know, I mean, his music's complicated. It's not really sight reading type of music.
Oh, it's very complex.
It's very complicated. Plus, he doesn't have charts for it anyway. So he said, no, we'll just jam and do some stuff. And then right at the very last minute, of course, Jeff Berlin wrote out "Water on the Brain," which is kind of a tough tune, but I was somewhat familiar with it. So I read that, and it went great. We ended up going to the bar next door, hanging out for a couple hours, and afterwards he said, "Hey man, my drummer Chad has just moved to Australia. I need a guy, you know, for local stuff and possibly touring stuff." I said, "Are you interested?" And,
wow.
And so that's how I got the gig. And then about a year later, while we were doing the quartet stuff back then with his East Coast guys, and then about a year later, he said, well, I need a bass player for some trio stuff in town. And then I got Carp on the gig.
Oh, okay.
That's the evolution of that. But Alan was such a sweetheart. We got in so much trouble. We went to Japan. I probably went with him 3 or 4 times to Japan, probably Europe about the same 3 or 4 times, and then the States probably about 6 times. And I was like in and out of the band over a period of about 10 years.
Okay.
And I started it in the band, I think, in 94. And in 96, I got the call to do YANNI. So the YANNI gig was a retainer gig. For those that don't know, a retainer is you get paid a certain amount every week, even if you don't play. So it was a really good one financially for me, and exposure wise.
Oh yeah.
You wouldn't believe the cats that called us up when we were in New York. We did Radio City for 2 weeks, and like Randy Brecker called Omar Hakim came out a couple of times. All these jazz cats. I'm like, really? You sure you want to come to this? And they're all, yeah, man. Our dates, our girls love Yanni. So that was the thing. So actually, and Peter Levin came out from Peter Gabriel. All these cats. I'm like, it was pretty cool. Anyway, go on.
Yeah,
sorry.
Well, it was just so weird that the word came down through the grapevine that you were going to do that gig, because I know those kinds of gigs are really big. And I knew he was super popular, and I was never a fan of the music because it was just a lot like the stuff that I did back in high school when I was noodling around at the piano. And I would sit and watch him play in the early videos, and the girls were all swooning. And I was like, the guy's just doing hair flips like a girl does when she's trying to get attention, and smiling incredibly confidently. Well, and he had a vibe. That wasn't that the thing that sold him, is he just had this vibe or something.
He had the vibe, and how that went down, as I understand it, was he was dating Linda Evans at the time. They were an item, and Linda was tight with Oprah. So she got Yanni on the Oprah show, and all those housewives that watched that show, like when there used to be record sales,
right?
The day after he was on there, he sold something like 150, 200,000 albums. The very next day.
In one day.
It was like ridiculous.
Wow.
So that's the power of media. I mean, of television.
Yeah.
And especially back then.
But when you were in the band, I mean, I would see hear stories, and then I would see like these pictures. And dude, were you the one did you play it live at the Acropolis? Were you at that?
No, I did. That was Charlie Adams did it before. Charlie's always been his drummer, but he took a 3-year hiatus, and that's when I did it. I had a 3-year contract, but I did the video. We did the Taj Mahal in India, and we did the Forbidden City in China, and we were the first and possibly only band to actually get granted the rights. Actually, well, not for India, because I know Paul. I think Paul. Oregon, I think, did something there.
Oh, Paul Horn did, yeah.
Yeah, Paul Horn, right. But in China, I think we were the first. And, back then, that was like 22, 23 years ago. Everybody was on bikes back then. It was a really charming place. And I've been to China in the last couple of years, and it's so polluted now. There's so many cars. It's like, it's a rat race over there. It's a whole nother vibe. So I was lucky to experience it.
You went at a really good time, but Absolutely. When you and I used to tour together and go to Japan and stuff, I thought that was maybe even earlier. It was like the late 80s, early 90s. Yep. It was, the whole world was more relaxed, and the whole world was more charming, and everything was less sophisticated and less complicated. And that was all pre-internet too. But now with this freaking virus, I mean, it's got to be impacting you. My whole year of gigs is canceled. Like once March 15th hit, everything just was canceled till September, then October, November, and now there's nothing.
Yep, so same here. I think my last gig, I was over in Jakarta in Indonesia with the Ron King Big Band, and then I also did Jeff Lorber quartet, and I also did Mike Stern. So I had like a triple header when I was there. That was like at the very end of February. And then I took an extra 10 days because there's a place called Raja Ampat, which is way the hell out, like as far as you can go from civilization. Seriously, it's one of the most pristine ecological places on the planet. Anyway,
What's it called again? What's it called?
Raja Ampat. Almost like it's Ampat.
Okay.
Anyway, the most beautiful place I've ever been to in my entire life, and I've been to a lot of cool places. I always try and mix, if I can. I try to do my vacations after the gigs. So I took an extra 10 days and I went way the hell out there. And then we're like going over, we were thinking, well, this might get a little hairy coming back. And sure enough, I came back on March 10th, and like 2 days after, they stopped all flights from there. So
you got back in just in time.
Just in time. But yeah, my whole world, from that, I was supposed to go out for four months this year. This would have been a really big touring year for me. I usually don't go out that much, maybe a couple of months a year, because I'm trying to stay in more and just record albums either at my studio or wherever.
Right.
But yeah, it rocked all of us, but luckily, knock on wood, I picked up a whole bunch of recording gigs, and I have my own studio here. It's called Jackalope Recording Studio, which I know you know.
Well, I think it's interesting that we both have this kind of weird Western thing to our lives, because I grew up in LA.
Oh,
but yeah,
Haven Lodge.
There you go.
Bighorn Mountains, baby.
Bighorn Mountains, baby. Yeah. And when we first drove to Colorado, I was just going into high school, and we got here, and I was planning on USC with a film composing school and going into Hollywood, and we stop in Grand Junction at this restaurant, and Grand Junction, Colorado, our first stop when we get in the state line, and we go in to get a hamburger, and I'm looking around, and there's nothing but pictures of prize-winning cows with these big purple ribbons around their necks and antlers on the wall.
FHA, baby.
What's the FHA?
Now that was the thing that all the farmers' kids were in high school. It was like Future Farmers of America, but that doesn't work. That's not farmers. Oh, maybe it's FFA. Future Farmers America. That's what it is, not FFA. Yeah.
Well, since we're talking about farming and me and my yeehaw Colorado days and your woohoo Wyoming days, what the heck is a jackalope, and why did you call your studios that?
All right.
Is that a real animal?
Shh. Of course it is, Rob. Of course it is.
I see. Okay.
Now is it
a story that's? I don't want the animal rights people going to be banned off of YouTube. There's nothing weird about it, right?
You'll be good. And I actually have one mounted on my wall over here. I'll turn the camera around in a minute. But a jackalope is a fictitious animal. It's a cross between a jackalope and an antelope, and it's got antelope antlers.
Yeah.
And it's, jackalope, it's like a really large rabbit. Anyway, I'm going to turn this around real quick, if you can see it.
Oh, there it is, up above the door there.
You see it?
Yeah, right, I see the head.
Just above the door.
Yeah. Wow, dude.
So anyway, that's the jackalope. Actually, we found it in Pasadena at the flea market.
I was going to
I say, wait a minute, this belongs in my home. So
yeah, it's interesting how the Western kind of quiet thing. Now I've seen on Facebook a lot of times, like, it's interesting watching your Facebook feed, because you'll be like, okay, here I am at Royal Albert Hall, and then the next day you're like, here's me and my mom. I'm in Wyoming. Yeehaw.
That's right.
Still with us?
No, she passed away a couple of years ago. Okay. And she was a big supporter of music and just
and
all and me and my dreams, and as was my dad. and they saw you several times. They actually came down to Denver to watch us. I think they came to the Fox Theater one.
Yeah.
Was possibly.
And
pretty sure.
Yep. And, you know, I remember meeting your mom, and I remember my mom and your mom meeting each other and then being like this. Because the thing is that they had the similar type of support for their sons, you know, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And my mom was always such a huge fan of yours because she had, you know, started me with the drum lessons.
Right.
And, you know, she's the one that gave me Dave Brubeck and taught me what 5/4 was.
Wow. Was she a musician?
Yeah, she was a church piano player.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah,
I probably knew that, but
yeah.
Wow.
And so what was funny about it, though, Joel, is that she could tell because she had naturally like a good swing vibe when she played. So anytime she would come hear me play, the first person she would listen to would be the drummer. And when I had bad drummers, especially at a place like the Regis, she would write on a little note and send it up with the waitresses, say, "This drummer is terrible."
I remember the Regis. We played there.
Yeah, that was a good spot. But she was a fan of your playing and you, and she passed. She passed in 2010. So God rest our moms' souls, and thank you, moms, for all the support and everything that you've done. So, but going back to this amazing career of yours, both of us played in the Crusaders under different monikers at different times, and I knew it was always the goal of yours, because that's like a really big deal for somebody to play, for a drummer to replace Styx Hooper, or, you know, when I did it, it was Rayford Griffin, and it was Bubba Bryant, you know, for a long time.
Groovers.
But when you got in there, that was like a real feather in your cap, I think.
Absolutely. And I you know, since I was probably in 11th grade, I was a huge Crusaders fan. The first year out of high school, I was still playing trumpet. So I actually went to University of Wyoming for a year on a trumpet scholarship.
Okay.
And when I got there, I'm like, well, there isn't a whole lot of jazz here, but there is a lot of jazz in Fort Collins and Greeley and Denver. So what I used to do on the weekends is hitchhike from Laramie to like Fort Collins, where my brother was going to school to get his master's. And my number one hitchhiking thing on my Walkman at the time, number one album was Crusaders, A Chain Reaction, or it was probably the best of the hits at that time.
Right.
But I remember hitchhiking to that music just almost every weekend.
Wow.
And that was a blast. And when I finally got the call to do it, Joe called me up and you know, said, well, you were recommended by Sal Marquez and his ex-drummer Doug Belote, which Doug did it right before me.
Oh, okay.
So I had the both of them recommend me for that, and Joe said, well, I still want to hear you. So we got together for the union. He booked like 4 hours, and about a half an hour afterwards, he said, you sounded great. You got the gig. So I was like, cool. So I think he liked the fact that I could swing and play groove and listen. The big thing about playing with Joe, you put your big ears on, because at any point his solo could go anywhere. Like, you know, a normal solo might start low and build. Well, Joe's might start like this, really loud, and then it'll come down to a whisper, and then it's like this, and then it's all over the place. So you had to constantly watch him and constantly, like, almost telepathically pick up on where his solo was going. And I think he liked that about me, that I was able to do that. And it was really a blast, you know. And then played with all those cats.
Yeah, you were always a really dynamically sensitive drummer too, because in my own music I have a lot of dynamic stuff. And when we were in the studio with Bromberg and this and that, you could always just kind of feel it. Like you almost have this innate sense of what is the music supposed to do. And you were never one of those guys that was always grandstanding about you you're
Not
always
about that.
no, you're always trying to
No.
make the song
Yeah.
come to life the best way possible, you know. And I remember lots of gigs. Wilton Felder, who was kind of one of my mentors from the Crusaders, he told me Joe Sample story after Joe Sample story after Joe Sample story.
Yeah.
And, I can't tell any of them.
I bet.
But you know, next time we get together 25 years from now, hopefully I'll still be able to remember those. But Wilton had that same thing. It was like loud, soft, and it's deceptive too, because don't you think in a recording environment, a lot of that works to the disadvantage
Yep.
of the engineer. Like if you get, I remember doing a date with Abraham Laboriel, and the record company had sent him. And he's a great player, and he was absolutely 100% the wrongest cat of all to play on this tune. It was just it just wasn't happening. But when I heard Joe on the Michael Frank stuff is when it blew me away, because he didn't have that up and down. It was just this real consistent staccato arpeggiated, almost a tap dancey little Rhodes thing. That made the whole Michael Frank's thing for me.
Yeah.
And then when I found out who it was, I was like, "That's Joe Sample."
Was that the stuff that John Guerin was on?
Yeah, it was
well?
Art.
That was a great record. Yeah.
It had Monkey See, Monkey Do on there, and Popsicle Toes, and all of that stuff. But so Joel, so you're running a studio now. Tell me some of the gear that you have and all that.
Okay.
And the projects that you're doing.
Yeah, cool. Gear wise, I've got some Neve preamps. I've got a lunchbox, you know. And so I've got a bunch of API preamps. I've got a bunch of Neve preamps. I've got some Daking preamps, which are similar. It's a guy, George Daking, D-A-K-I-N-G. Not a lot of cats, you know, have heard of him. But my friend Paul Pesco was working for him for a while, so he gave me a deal on some refurbished ones. I've got those running at Apogee 1680. Converters, all that. Yeah, I've got a really good mic collection, bunch of Neumanns and whatnot. I'm actually doing some, buying some new gear as we speak. Let's see, what else? Go ahead.
No, what I was going to say is that I've been doing a lot of these podcast shows. The show is only like about a month old, but I've been recording a lot of them and talking to a lot of drummers. And one of the things that I've noticed with the drummers that I've picked for the show, because I have lots of options of guys to call. There's millions of guys to call for this, but no, Joe. But a lot of it is like, you know how to tune a drum.
Yeah.
That's so important.
You know what? Preamps are great and all, but you can get a great sound from a shitty preamp or a mediocre preamp, let's say, if you know how to tune and hit the drums. And I learned a long time ago when I was at Berklee College of Music. I'm like, well, what am I going to major in? Performance just seemed like, well, I'm going to do that anyway, so let me learn something. And I always wanted to be in the studios, so I actually got a degree in audio engineering and production.
Wow.
So I could learn what to do on the other side of the board. But I really, that was one reason. I never set out to be an engineer, and I'm not the greatest engineer, but I do get a really great drum sound. I know how to tune, and I learned how to tune way back then. I just taught myself, like, okay, this is, because, being in classes every day and in the studio every day, you hear it back, and you go, "Wow, that worked. That didn't work."
Right.
And you can, experiment.
Well, I remember we would go all over the world together, and it would always be some different drum set, and somehow you would sit down and you would make it sound like Joel Taylor's drums, no matter what. Somehow.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got a formula. I've got different ways, and I tune different ways for different genres. But I do have a very specific way I tune, and I mean, I pretty much, I don't tune to exact pitches, but I do make sure the drums themselves are in tune with each other, and there's no waves. A lot of cats now, they'll just, oh well, I'm hearing waves, waves, or it's a little out of tune.
Phase cancel.
They'll just, they'll get a piece of tape. It's like, man, if you can't tune your drums without tape, there's a problem. Okay, I hate tape. Tape ruins the drum sound. But I mean, for a specific sound, it's okay. If you want to go retro, sure, put some tape on there. The only drum I'll put tape on will be my snare, and that's either tape or moon gel. Sometimes half the time I'll have it wide open. Mm-hmm. I've got a huge collection of snares, like 30 snares. A lot of them from the early 20s. That brass back then, the brass shells, the old, super old Black Beauties were the shit. Just my favorite. So I've got like 5 of those in different, sizes. And I just, each drum has its own little range. So I kind of keep them, okay, if I listen to a tune, I'm going, that snare would work on that. Right, and the same thing with cymbals and hi-hats, I'll change stuff out all the time.
Well, the live side of what you do in the studio always impressed me so much, because I had been working with drummers in Denver before moving to LA, and you were one of the first drummers that I worked with and recorded with in LA, and you were just so quick, man. I mean, you were like, boop, 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 boop. You learned the tunes, and you knew how your drums were supposed to sound. You played your ass off, and then we're heading to the bar, baby. I mean, it was like,
thank you. I mean, that's
so fun.
Thank you. That's what I trained for. I mean, that's why I practice. I used to get anything. I mean, my top 4 or 5 drummers were Ricky Lawson, J.R. Robinson, Steve Gadd, Jeff Porcaro, probably Keltner was in there as well. There's probably some others. I mean, for studio stuff. So back in the late 70s, early 80s, I would get anything those cats were on, learn the grooves, learn the fills, and I figured out, I figured out how those guys play a pop tune and why they sound different from other cats. And it's all about the ones and the downbeats, the 1s and the 3s. Like a lot of drummers, if it's a syncopated thing, they're back at doom, don't, boom, 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 something like that.
Yeah.
That's what might be what the bass player's playing, but these guys would play boom, 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 boom. They'd just play simple, solid. On the, you don't have to hit all the upbeats. I learned a lot about that, and all those guys did it. And I said, that's why these guys are recording. And I mean, plus they have great pockets. Right. But I learned about, their patterns, and of course all the Steely Dan drummers, as well. Ridiculous. Anyway, getting back to my studio. So I've been lucky, man. This during the pandemic, I've been doing a lot of recordings. I actually have a few here that I had up on YouTube. I don't know if you have time. I could play a little clip of a couple of them.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't know what the audio quality is like, but
anyway, let's see. The past year, I did.
Hey, Joel, let's do this, man. Why don't you just tell people what your YouTube channel is, and then whatever's there, you can send it over there.
Well, these aren't up on my YouTube channel yet, but I'll make sure I put them up there. Yeah, by the time it airs, this
okay. Well, what is the name of your channel?
That's a good. I think it's called the Real Joel Taylor Drums. The Real Joel Taylor Drums.
Okay, YouTube.com/the Real Joel Taylor Drums.
Yeah, because there's several Joel Taylor musicians out there these days.
Yeah, I bet. Well, I want to go back, Joel, because this is something during show I thought I really wanted to get you to weigh in on, because you're still a college teacher. You've been a drum instructor for years. you went to Berkeley back in the early, what I call the early years of Berkeley, even though that was earlier than that. And I've known people from Berkeley that have graduated from your era, like early 80s, mid 80s to about 1990. And the biggest thing that they all said about Berkeley wasn't, these were the best teachers I ever had. It was the best classroom. Boston has the best weather. And what they all said was that the Berkeley alumni network was the most vast and powerful, unseen musician network in the United States. That's what they all said. They said, I went to Berkeley for the network because I would just be bumping into these people constantly. And that was always their first question.
Huh.
Did you go to Berkeley?
Yeah.
Hey, did you go to Berkeley?
Right.
And then I'm thinking, oh man, do I want to say I dropped out of Northern Colorado? Do I want to say that? That's not a good.
That's a great school, by the way, UNC.
Well, it is now. It became great the year after I quit. The year after I quit, they got Gene Aiken, and it became this huge thing.
I see.
But
yeah,
here's my question. Sorry for going on so long. My question about Berkeley is, now that Berkeley costs like more than $40,000 a year, and in the last 10 years, coming out of Berkeley have been all of my former students returning and saying, we've spent $250,000 at Berkeley and I don't have a job, and now we're all in debt. What do I do, Mr. Mullins? Like, I'm going to say that to you. What do you tell him, Mr. Taylor?
It's really tough. Unless you have a scholarship, I wouldn't put that kind of money into a career.
Mm-hmm.
Into your career, sure, but not into a school of music. I mean, if you're going to get $250,000 in debt over a 4-year period, that's just insane. You're never going to get out of that debt playing music unless you get are one of the top 0.001% of people that get some dream gig.
Well, and what's so crazy about it, and maybe you can help me kind of clarify this impression that I have about it, is that, see, they come out and then they're resentful over there not being a job, but the colleges in general have kind of not really promised you a job, but they said, oh yeah, once you get in our system and our network and work with us, and we'll, sometimes that works out, but a lot of times it doesn't work out at all. So now,
I would say, I mean, if you go to school, try and get your teaching degree. Teach. You can always fall back on that. And as far as, along with gigging, you kind of like you said, I teach at University of Redlands and I teach at Cal Poly Pomona. Okay. And they're both fairly small music programs, but I do have some really talented students there. Great. Some are going to be professionals. Some have been gigging since they were freshmen, since they got in.
Wow.
So I've got a couple of those guys that are really incredible. Majority are, they're going to be teachers or they just enjoy it for enjoyment.
Right, a hobbyist. Sure.
Yeah, a hobbyist. But it's really tough. I mean, it's tougher now than ever. The talent pool is so deep and so wide.
Right.
That, I mean, they're going to be competing against me once they're out of school. I'm going to be competing against them. Mm-hmm. It's a tough cookie.
Yeah, but Joel, we got to remember one thing is that you've got the blessings of the jackalope and they don't.
Of course, that's true.
I mean, so there's that wild card factor in there too. So speaking of wild cards,
hold on. Go ahead.
Yeah. Speaking of wild cards, this is a question that I asked a couple of my guests, Larry Antonino, the great bass player. Then I'll ask you, what was the best gig you ever did, and what was the worst gig or worst tour you're ever on? I know I'm kind of springing this on you because you've done literally thousands and multiple thousands of hours of stuff. But I mean, is there any gig that stands out as like, man, when we did this, it was just the best, you know? Maybe that one in China that you guys played, or?
That one was really great. When we went to, YANNI in India was really good. And the reason why was because I spent a whole month afterwards hiking the Himalayas in Nepal.
Wow.
I did a whole trek. I lost like 20 some pounds.
Wow.
I was in really, really good shape. And it was just me and my Sherpa guide, just the two of us. And the best part about it, well, not the best part, but another good part, it was $20 a day for both of us for 3 meals a day, a place to sleep, and like the best views in the world.
Oh,
that was incredible.
Wow.
So that was a really good one. Tahiti I've done several times. That's always nice.
I'm jealous. I've never been to Tahiti. I've always heard it's great. Never been there.
That's a really good one. I mean, there's so many great ones.
Well, here's a bad one. Here's a bad one. This is I'll tell this really quickly, but just to give you a chance to think of maybe one of your worst ones. And of course, you and I never got into.
I got it.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I don't even have to tell this one. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, worst in some ways, great in other ways. My first gig with the Rippingtons. Right? I did a summer tour with them back in, it was probably late 80s sometime or early 90s.
I remember those guys, yeah.
And great band, great music, Russ Freeman. But we did the Aruba Jazz Festival. And we got there a couple of days early so we could kind of have a little, chill time,
right?
Hang out on the island. So I went with Steve Bailey, who got me on the gig. He's a great bass player. He's chair of the Berklee College of Music bass department now.
Okay.
Anyway, so we got there and we're like, well, let's rent some motorbikes and let's go to the other side of the island and let's see what kind of trouble we can cause. So we're over there tearing it up, way in these sand dunes, and we find these wild goats, right? And the goats really didn't want.
Wait a minute. What is it with you and these animals, Joel? This is getting weird. We go from jackalopes to antelopes. Now I've got goats in the picture. I'm getting a little scared for my viewers.
So we're on the other side of the island, sand dunes, hanging out, and like having a great time. And then these goats show up. So we're chasing the goats, right? But the goats have a secret power. They go.
I bet they do.
They have a secret power that if you mess with a goat, you're going down.
Really?
So as soon as we left that, we came onto just like a dirt gravel road, and I'm going about 40 miles an hour, and I start fishtailing, and I lost it. I tumbled over, broke my collarbone in 2 places. I got road rash all over my back, all over the left side of my body. I still have a scar that looks like a shark bite in my stomach, on the side of my stomach. Yeah, from a huge rock being embedded. And this was 2 days before the gig. So of course, I'm like, well, how am I going to do the gig? I'm like, well, I didn't break my arm or my wrist. It's just up here. So I said, Russ, man, I'll do the gig. I can do the gig. But he was freaking out. So he actually called Call of Duty. He called Vinny and I think a couple of other guys to see if they could come out. Thank God nobody was available. I ended up doing the gig, taking Valium, for the pain.
Right.
And the thing is, as if I know Rippingtons music, it's got a lot of side stick. The thing is, in the sling, I couldn't do my side stick. So I'm on the stage, and my drum roadie at the time, Damian Ogus, was the drummer. And he'd been with the Rippingtons for years, with Tony Morales for forever, right? So he knew the music. I said, dude, you come here and play the side sticks, and I'll play everything else. So the first 3 tunes of the set, he's playing the side sticks. I'm doing this shit. And Steve Bailey's like, man, the time feels a little strange. I better check on Joel, see if he's okay. So he jumps up on the riser, and he sees 3 hands coming out of my body, 3 arms. The look on Steve's face, nobody else knew, like what we had planned, you know. It was just between me and Damien, the roadie. And so he lost it, man. He just like, oh, my God. So after that, he said, Joel, are you okay? So, I got the hint that the time was a little, little funky. So I got rid of the brace that I had on. Then I was able to do the side sticks, got through the gig. It was all fine.
Well, when you're in a place as far away as Aruba, it's not like you've got, Cedar Sinai Hospital level medical guys sitting right there. There's probably nobody, that could really take care of it. And interestingly enough, the tie-in that I have to Russ and Aruba is that after you guys did that trip and he came back, he recorded the song called Aruba and called me to play the piano solo.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So
how cool.
Yeah, I know. There's another way of the weird LA intersections like we always have. Well, man, I can't thank you enough for coming to my show today, bro. I'm so happy to see you doing so well.
Before we go, can I a couple of projects that I've been recording lately.
Do tell.
The new Gloria Estefan record just came out.
What?
I did that in my studio. It's called Brazil 305. Check that out.
Gloria Estefan, Miami Sound Machine formerly, yeah.
Yeah. Robbie Krieger's Jam Kitchen.
Now, Robbie Krieger, for those of you that don't know, is a founding member of The Doors.
Yeah. So we have a jam band. It's called Jam Kitchen, and that just dropped a couple of weeks ago. That's called The Ritual Begins at Sunset. That actually that was recorded at Robbie's place. Another one that just came out, the Brig Band, and you know the Brig.
I know the Brig.
You did it with us a couple of.
Yeah,
you did it with us a couple of times, right?
Yeah, for people that don't know what the Brig is, it's this like really cool kind of divey beach bar in Venice Beach. And then Joel, you've been down there playing every Tuesday for like 20 years or something. It
was like 17 years.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's a new album. It's called Alive and Plugged. That's a cool one. And I got co-wrote most of the tunes on that.
Wow. What's the keyboard player's name that runs that? I forget his name.
Kenny Burgomaster.
Yeah.
Kenny Burgomaster.
Yeah.
And he's a film composer that I work with a lot. And then lastly, I've been working with Bill Champlin and Bobby Kimball for a composer named John Zeka, and we got a bunch of new music out. So check out my YouTube channel. I'll make sure I put all that stuff up there.
And I'll put it in the show notes too for people down after we're done. And
if anybody needs drum tracks, I'm your guy.
Yeah, and it's, folks, it's really true because Joel is an amazing live player with such great feel. Like that's the thing, because I do a lot of programming. I started out on drums too, but I'd always, if I could afford it, I would always, if I could afford it, rather have you for a couple of reasons. One, because you're such a great player, but the other one is it's just such a fun hang. Like I don't remember us ever being on a gig and just going, oh man, it sucked being with Joel or it sucked being with Rob. Like we went this one time. We were in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Oh yeah.
The first time that it snowed seriously in 60 years. And we were down there basically skating in our boots, like on the snow and stuff. And I don't know if you remember that night, there were 6 people in the audience, and I ended up turning it into the Newlywed Game because it was 3 couples, and I was interviewing the couples. And that was
I don't remember that, but that's what
that was the trip. And we were staying in like an old converted Catholic school-ish hotel, and the bass player Marty Ruddy, I heard in the afternoon, I heard this banging and clanging going on. It was wood floors. I knew it was coming from Marty's room. I could hear it, and I heard crash. I'm thinking, man, I better go see if Marty's okay, because this is before we did the gig. And I'm knocking on the door. He opens up the door, and he's got like tools all over the place and all this crap laying around. I said, Marty, what are you doing? And he says, well, as you can see here, I got on my compass and the bed was not facing magnetic north.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. He used to do that. I remember that.
And if the bed's not facing magnetic north, I won't be able to channel my chakras and my energy in order to play.
Yeah.
And I was like, we are going to get so kicked out of North Carolina, dude. So, all right, man.
All right, man.
Seeing you, bro. You have a wonderful time.
Thank you.
And thanks again for doing the show.
All right. Thanks for having me. Take it easy.
All right. Have a good rest of the day. Take it easy.
Thank you. Bye.